I've been using point-and-shoot cameras for most of my photography life. I think it's the form factor and the actual design of these cameras that make it reliable to shoot with, easy to carry and travel with. And I think most of the travel trips I've been on as a kid and growing up have been documented with these point-and-shoot cameras. I remember taking film photos in India with a Canon point-and-shoot. I don't even have it anymore. Before the advent of the phone and before phones even had adequate cameras, we used these cameras to actually document everything in our life. And now I find that with the creation of the cell phone and the proper high megapixel cameras on these cell phones, there's a sort of saturation in the images that we see taken from these phones. Not that it's a bad thing, and the quality is really good and it's really nice to document things as you see them, but there's a sort of look to them that doesn't inspire me to want to take photos or even think these are compelling photos in a way that a film camera would, or like a proper point-and-shoot camera. Now, during the height of the pandemic, I ended up getting this Panasonic point-and-shoot camera, and it was great. I found that I took it on a lot of trips that I went on, and I ended up getting some of my favorite videos that I edited. The one thing I will say, despite its limitations, was that its form factor was great. It did take not the best photos, but you could always edit that. But the thing was, I never really wanted to do that, so I ended up wanting to get more into the film photo aspect of it rather than just the digital side. Film photo aspect being that you don't have to edit the photos, they come out looking pretty good with good colors, good dynamic range. So I dabbled in getting a point-and-shoot camera, just like a disposable one. But I found that on the sort of long-term scale of getting the film rolls and then having to develop that film, the cost just would have been too much. And so I wanted to get back into the digital side. And I found that TikTok was recommending me the X100V, which is sort of like that film alternative. And I found that the photos looked really good. The JPEGs were great, and the fact that it was just the JPEG straight at the camera looking like a film photo, that sort of inspired me to want to get it. And so doing my own research on the actual prices of getting an X100V, I found that this was like $2,000, and that's just not feasible for a point-and-shoot camera with a fixed focal length at that. At least this Panasonic had a 30 times zoom, which actually helped a lot. But the $2,000 just for point-and-shoot for a fixed focal length didn't seem worth it to me. And I ended up getting an alternative to the X100V, which is the predecessor to it actually. I got the X100S. Now this camera is only 10 years old. It's only 16 megapixels, and I find that that's perfectly fine for me. It looks kind of like a film camera in the sense that it has that sort of silver trim to it. It's even a plus because it makes me want to carry it around with me as I shoot. The autofocus is genuinely bad because I've used autofocus and it gives you that false positive where it'll say that it's focused but it's not. So I just keep it in manual focus and I just implement back button focus. And in good light, it'll lock onto a subject, and then you can just manipulate the ring to actually lock on a focus. Now, the one thing with the manual focus is that it is a focus by wire system on this lens, and it's genuinely not that great. However, I find it's fine. If you're just good, you just gotta slow down your shots. In terms of limitations, it's not only that it forces you to slow down, it also makes you be more deliberate with what you shoot. But I find that the tactile nature of the aperture ring and the shutter speed dial as well as the exposure dial, you end up being more deliberate with how you control your image and seeing how each factor can manipulate the image in terms of the exposure triangle. It gives you that vintage camera vibe where you have that aperture ring and all the little controls that vintage cameras used to have. And I think that's something that Fuji does better over than other camera systems, is that it has those tactile buttons and it makes you more creative in the way that you capture your images. Not that these other cameras can't do that, it's just that having these controls right in front of you, you end up wanting to manipulate them to see how they work, sort of experimenting with what you got. And now early on I experimented with a lot of film recipes on this. However, because this is like an older sensor with the X-Trans 2, you don't have like classic chrome or the Eterna film simulations. So I just ended up using Astia and monochrome in cases that I want black and white. However, I kind of just stick to Astia now with sort of manipulations to the highlights and shadows. And this is pretty much what I do. I don't actually change the film simulations anymore. I find that just the one is fine. And I almost treat it like a film camera where I just capture what I do. If anything, I'll change the white balance and the exposure in my shots, and that'll be the only thing. But overall, I find this to be like a fun shooting experience. Another limitation I found is with the 23mm f2 lens. I'm used to the zooms on that my old zoom I had on my Nikon DSLR, as well as the zoom on the Panasonic point and shoot that had like a 30 times zoom. And so I was kind of locked into this 35mm full frame equivalent, and it's not something I was familiar with early on, and so I had to get used to it. And there was sort of times when I wish it was wider to like 28mm full frame. 35 is not my favorite, but I think this camera sort of limits you in that way to being creative with what you could do with the 35. And now shooting with the prime is sort of like a new thing as well. And I find that I wasn't really used to shooting with the prime at first, but now that I've shot with the prime, I found that it's actually very fun. I like primes a lot more, and I actually prefer them over zooms because of the creativity that it kind of forces you to have. It's a much more deliberate shooting experience rather than just zooming in and getting what you can with that shot. I feel sort of lazy with the zoom now that I think about it, but with the prime, you have to sort of walk around, work the scene that you have in front of you. And now, despite the age of the camera, it captured so many great images, some of my favorite images that I've ever captured in my life. And it sort of makes me think around the hype of new cameras, and I find that having an older camera, the technology was still there back then to capture great images, and so you don't really need the latest and greatest to do what you want to do, especially with the point and shoot. This is perfect for what I want to do. This is able to capture the memories I have with the people around me, and that's what a point and shoot is good for. I find that it's the best for capturing memories that you have without getting in the way. And despite it being a more manual experience, you end up having more fun shooting that way. I have no regrets buying this camera, and I don't think I need the more expensive iterations at this point in my life. And I'll always cherish the memories and the photos that I capture with this camera.